On a quiet flight over the U.S., a white man suddenly kicked a 6-year-old black girl in the stomach, the daughter of a famous CEO. No one understood what was happening. The crew was confused. The passengers were silent. That flight, delayed for a few seconds, but forever changed a life. If it were you, what would you do when the world turns its back on injustice right before your eyes? Would you stay silent for fear of getting into trouble, or would you stand up, knowing the price you would pay? Sometimes, just a small moment in the sky makes the whole society have to look at itself. Can a father protect his daughter from a system of power? Is courage enough to overcome prejudice? Imagine, if you were on that flight, would you choose to stay silent or speak the truth? Today's story is not about discrimination or anger, but about trust, justice, and the human heart. If you believe the truth is still worth telling, please share this story and subscribe to the channel so we can start our journey to find the answers. The Pacific airplane sat motionless at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in Atlanta. Outside the window, the sky was gray and drizzling. A long line of passengers filed onto the plane, all tired, carrying suitcases and the frustration of a delayed Monday morning. In row 14, a girl about 10 years old was trying to pack a purple backpack. Her hair was tied up, and her bright brown eyes looked around curiously. Her name was Amara Barrett, the only daughter of Elias Barrett, CEO of the defense technology company AERION. Today she was flying with her nanny, Lorraine Jenkins, to Seattle, where her father was meeting with the Department of Defense about the National Artificial Intelligence Project. Amara loved to fly. Every trip was a small adventure for her. She smiled softly as she looked out the window, her fingers tracing the misty glass. Lorraine sat beside her, reading a magazine, her gentle eyes occasionally glancing at her, as was her habit. A voice came on the loudspeaker, reminding passengers to fasten their seatbelts. Everything was normal until a man walked in. He was tall, with graying hair, a brown leather jacket, and a cold, tired look in his eyes. The ticket said seat 15C, right behind Amara. His name was Richard Hale. His voice was hoarse and a little harsh. "Excuse me, move your back, kid." Amara turned back and smiled quickly. "Oh, sorry, sir. I'll take it down." She reached for her backpack from the passenger seat, leaning slightly to get out of the way. But Richard winced, took a step back, and then suddenly, with a hard kick to her stomach, the thud was harsh. Amara doubled over, her breath catching in her throat. Everything around her stopped for a few seconds. A woman ahead of her gasped. Another man dropped a newspaper. Lorraine threw the magazine on the chair and rushed over. "Oh my God! What did you just do?" Richard stepped back, his voice cold. "She was blocking the way. I just pushed her out of the way." Her Lorraine was stunned. "She's only 10. Are you crazy?" Amara sat down on the chair, holding her stomach, her eyes filled with tears. A female flight attendant approached, her voice flustered. "Please, calm down. Sir, ma'am, let's talk calmly." Lorraine pointed. "No, you don't understand." He kicked her in the stomach. Richard shrugged. "No need to exaggerate. I didn't use any force." People around started whispering. A young man took out his phone to film. An old woman frowned. A middle-aged man sighed and muttered, "Always some drama before takeoff." Captain Torres stepped out of the cockpit, his voice stern. "What's going on here?" The flight attendant made a brief report. Torres looked at Amara, who was still looking down, trembling slightly. Then he turned to Richard. "Sir, please step outside while we sort this out." Richard smiled faintly. "Oh, really? You're going to kick me off because of this, brat?" The word brat drove Lorraine crazy. "Watch your mouth. That's a child." The air was thick. The whole cabin held its breath. Some people held their phones and filmed. Others avoided eye contact. Someone whispered, "This is bad." Richard folded his arms. Not moving. I paid for this seat. I'm not moving. Captain Torres took a deep breath. He spoke in a calm, resolute voice. Then the plane won't move either. You choose, sir. Silence. The rain outside the window seemed to be tapping on the plane's body. Finally, Richard shrugged, smiled faintly, and stood up. Fine, but you'll regret this. As he stepped out, the passengers on either side of him avoided his eyes. Lorraine bent down and took Amara's hand. It's okay, baby. It's okay. Amara looked up, tears rolling down her face. Why? Did he do that? Miss Lorraine was silent for a long time. Because there are people who think because they are older, whiter, they have more power. The loudspeaker blared again. Flight delayed due to a security issue. Everyone sighed. Someone shook their head. But Lorraine couldn't hear anything anymore. All she could see was Amara's small hands shaking, and a vague fear welled up in her heart. She looked out the window. The rain was falling harder. Below, the luggage carts moved slowly. Everything seemed to stand still, except for the silent question in her mind. If Elias knew about this, what would he do a moment later? Her phone rang. The screen read, Elias Barrett, incoming call. Lorraine closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She knew that not only was the flight delayed, but their entire lives were about to change. The announcements continued to blare steadily through the waiting area, mixed with the sound of rain tapping gently on the metal roof of the Atlanta airport. Lorraine sat in row 4, clutching her phone, her heart still trembling. Beside her, Amara leaned her head on her shoulder, falling asleep from exhaustion and shock. People continued to walk ahead, dragging suitcases, the wheels crunching. A few passengers looked at them, a few sympathetically, but most just walked past silently. The way they avoided Lorraine's eyes reminded her of old times, the 80s in the South, when she was a black maid in a wealthy neighborhood. She had seen that look before. The look of people who knew something was wrong, but chose to remain silent. She gently stroked Amara's hair. Her breathing was even, her innocent face still streaked with dried tears. Lorraine swallowed, then looked out the window. A young flight attendant approached. Her voice was soft, but worried. Ma'am, we're very sorry for the inconvenience. The flight was delayed for about 40 minutes due to security. Are you and the baby okay? Lorraine nodded. Fine. It's just, I don't understand how anyone could do that to a child. The flight attendant smiled wryly. I don't understand either. But he's been taken away for questioning. The captain is writing his report. We hope you understand. Lorraine looked deep into the young girl's eyes. It was calm but heavy. Sympathy for whom? The flight attendant was confused. I mean, given the situation. Maybe he didn't mean to. It wasn't intentional. Lorraine's voice dropped. If the person who got kicked wasn't this black girl but a blonde-haired, blue-eyed child, do you think people would say, it wasn't intentional? The girl was silent. Her face turned red. Then she bowed her head. I'm sorry, ma'am. Lorraine said nothing. She just let out a small breath and turned to look at Amara. A tear escaped the corner of her eye, even in her sleep. Outside, the pale white light shone through the glass. The raindrops were like silver dust. Lorraine thought of Elias, the man she had been with for 10 years, not only as a superior, but as a younger brother she had hoped to protect. Elias was a kind man, always calm, gentle, even too gentle for this thorny world. She knew that if he knew, he would not get angry right away. He would be silent first, like he always did when he suffered injustice, then say with a very gentle sentence, we will solve it with reason, Lorraine. But this time, Lorraine knew. Things would be different. She picked up the phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed Elias's number. The screen read calling. His voice came from the other end, low and calm. Lorraine, are you and the girl there? Yet she hesitated. Elias, something happened. A passenger, a man, he kicked Amara. There was a long, ominous pause. She heard a sharp intake of breath, then silence. Elias's voice was lower, strained. Is she okay? No. He's fine. Just sore and scared. Airport police are on the scene. He's been removed from the plane. Silence again. The rain outside seemed to beat harder. Elias said softly. Keep her out of public view. Don't let anyone near. I'm on my way. Lorraine gripped the phone tightly. Elias, you have to calm down. Don't do anything stupid. I won't do anything stupid. But I won't let this be forgotten. The call ended. The screen went black. Lorraine looked at her reflection in the mirror, the face of a woman familiar with the wounds of society, but never seen it so clearly. A cold wind blew through the door as a group of airport police officers passed by. The sound of boots clicking on the floor was dry. Lorraine pulled Amara close and whispered, Don't worry. Daddy will be there soon. Amara opened her eyes slightly. Miss, did they arrest him? Yes. Son, they are questioning him. There will be justice. Son. The girl was silent for a moment, then asked softly, her voice trembling, But what if they don't believe me? The question made Lorraine choke, a 10-year-old, already knowing the fear of being doubted, just because of the color of her skin. She stroked Amara's hair and said softly, I'll make them believe. A middle-aged man in a gray suit sitting next to them turned around. He looked at them thoughtfully. I saw everything. I recorded a video. If necessary, I will testify. Lorraine looked at him, eyes wide. Really, I'm a reporter for the Seattle Chronicle. This can't be allowed to go. A small ray of light flickered in Lorraine's heart. She nodded in thanks, her voice trembling. Thank you. Thank you very much. The man smiled and placed his hand on her shoulder. My daughter, you are very strong. Don't let anyone make you think you are small. Amara looked at him and nodded slightly. Then the loudspeaker sounded again. A steady female voice. Attention. Passengers. Flight 173 to Seattle will be delayed for an additional hour due to ongoing investigation. Thank you for your patience. Lorraine sighed. A very soft sigh, as if letting go of everything. She leaned her head back, looking up at the ceiling. The fluorescent light reflected off her moist eyes. The image of that kick flashed through her mind fast, cold, decisive, and the man's eyes empty, soulless. She wondered, how many people like him were out there, people who believed they had the right to hurt others, just because they thought they were superior. She took Amara's small hand and squeezed it. You know, Amara, people can hate you, but you can't let that hate define you. Amara nodded, her eyes still red. I just want to go home. Ma'am, yes, but before we leave, we have to show them the truth. Do you agree? The little girl looked at her and nodded, a small nod, but a determined one. Lorraine smiled and kissed the little girl on the forehead. That's my girl. At that moment, the loudspeaker rang again, this time not announcing a flight delay, but the voice of a security guard. Mr. Elias Barrett, please proceed to gate D14. Your family is waiting. Lorraine turned. In the crowd, she saw the tall figure of Elias walking quickly. Black coat, face stern. He looked around for them, his eyes full of restraint. Lorraine took a deep breath. She knew the moment he met his daughter would be more than just a reunion. It would be the beginning of a storm. The rain in Atlanta had not let up. On the freeway heading toward the airport, the headlights of the cars stretched out, reflecting off the glistening road. In the back of the black SUV, Elias Barrett sat, his hands clasped together, staring out the window. The phone on the seat was still on. the screen still showing the last call from Lorraine. His personal assistant, David, sitting in the front seat, glanced at him in the rearview mirror and hesitantly asked, "Sir, do you need me to call the airline first?" Elias did not answer immediately. He took a deep breath, his voice low, calm to the point of coldness. "No need. They will know when I arrive." The sentence was brief, but it made the atmosphere in the car heavy. David was silent. He had worked with Elias for 6 years, seen him face defense meetings, the media, billions of dollars in pressure. But he had never seen him like this, silent. Eyes dark, no visible emotion, only a deep, dangerous repression. The car stopped at the domestic terminal. Elias opened the door and stepped out. The rain hit his jacket, chilling him. He paid it no mind. The only image in his mind was his daughter, Amara, the girl who talked a lot, who laughed a lot, who asked questions that made him laugh on busy mornings. Now, that image was associated with a kick. He walked quickly, his long legs stretching through the security area, his eyes scanning dozens of unfamiliar faces. The airport loudspeakers faintly sounded Flight 173 to Seattle, still delayed. Then he saw Lorraine. She stood near window D14, holding Amara in her arms. The moment the little girl saw her father, she immediately burst into tears. Elias walked over, wordlessly bent down and hugged his daughter tightly. The hug was so long that the people around had to look away. Amara choked, her voice as small as a breath. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I didn't do anything wrong." Elias shook his head slightly, placing his hand on his son's back. "No, honey, you don't need to apologize. Never." Lorraine stood beside him, her eyes red. "Elias, he's in police custody. They're taking his statement. I told them to report him for assault." Elias nodded slightly. Did they hear Lorraine exhaled, shaking her head slightly? Not really. They said they would look further because there were no obvious injuries. Elias looked down at the daughter in his arms, his eyes darkening. "There was no visible injury," he repeated, his voice low, almost a whisper. "But injuries don't always leave marks." He picked up Amara and placed her on the chair. She still held her father's hand. Lorraine watched him, noticing the eerie silence. She knew a storm was brewing beneath the calm. An airport police officer approached, his voice stiff. "Mr. Barrett, this is Lieutenant Harris. We talked to Mr. Hale. He says it was a misunderstanding. The girl was in the way, and he reacted naturally." Elias stood up and faced the policeman. His eyes were calm, but his words were sharp. "A natural reflex," he asked. His natural reflex was to kick a 10-year-old in the stomach. He claims he did not mean to injure. "Where's the cabin footage?" Elias interrupted. "I know the plane's security cameras are there. Have you seen it?" Harris looked away. "Engineering is looking into it, but it will take time." Elias took a step forward. His voice was still low, but it made everyone around him step back. "Do you have children?" Officer Harris was silent. "If someone kicked your child right in front of other people and said it was just a reflex, would you call it a misunderstanding?" Harris swallowed, then said softly, "We will continue to investigate." "Sir?" Elias said nothing more, just watched him leave. Lorraine approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Elias, you need to calm down. This is not the time to confront them. They will not be on our side." He turned to her, his eyes softening. "I know, but they won't silence me." A voice came from behind, warm, middle-aged. "I have video. Mr. Barrett." They turned around. It was Mr. Brown, the Seattle Chronicle reporter Lorraine had met earlier. He had his phone in his hand, the screen frozen on Richard Hale kicking Amara. Elias went over and watched the video. Amara leaned out of the way, and then the kick happened clear and obvious. The cabin held its breath. Her screams echoed through the air, squeezing his heart. "I'll turn from the opposite seat, Mr. Brown said softly. "If necessary. I'll hand you over to the police. Or to you." Elias looked at him for a long time. "Thank you. But first, I want to keep a copy." Brown nodded, sending the file to his phone. "You're a good father, Mr. Barrett. I have a daughter. If I were in your position, I probably wouldn't be as calm." Elias smiled slightly, but his eyes remained distant. Calm not because I wasn't angry, but because I knew anger would be what they would use against me. Lorraine listened to that and looked at him for a long time. She understood. He was not talking about this incident alone, but about a lifetime of learning to control himself. A while later, they were taken to a private room. Amara was examined. She had no serious injuries, just a slight pain in her abdomen, but her eyes were still filled with fear. Elias sat next to her, holding her hand. "You know, Amara, sometimes people do the worst things because they are afraid of what they don't understand. But that doesn't say anything about you. It just says who they are." Amara nodded slightly. "I just don't understand why everyone is watching, but no one is doing anything." Elias squeezed his son's hand gently. "Because most people are more afraid of trouble than they are of doing wrong. But if just one person dares to stand up, the world can be different." Lorraine stood in the corner of the room, listening with tears in her eyes. She remembered the first time she met Elias 10 years ago. He was a young engineer, saying he wanted to build a company that did not discriminate, only discriminated against talent. She had believed him, and now, looking at him, she knew that ideal was still there. It was just that the world was testing it more fiercely than ever. An airport employee knocked on the door and said the flight was still delayed. Elias looked at his watch and whispered to Lorraine, "We're not flying anymore. Send Amara home. I need to take care of this first." Lorraine was surprised. "Elias, what are you going to do?" He shrugged on his coat, his eyes straight ahead. "I'll talk to the airline, and if need be, to the world." His voice was low and firm. Only Lorraine realized this was no longer a father who only knew how to protect his son. This was a man about to go to war. The rain stopped in the afternoon. Pale sunlight filtered through the glass windows of the Atlanta airport, reflecting off the wet floor. The air was cold, but not as cold as the tension rising in everyone's hearts. Elias Barrett entered the Pacific Air Security Area. This area was off limits to the press and passengers. He was with Lorraine, and behind him was little Amara, clutching her father's hand. The police had detained Richard Hale in a makeshift interrogation room, and the plane, still parked on the tarmac, had not been cleared to take off. No one said anything. Elias's boots echoed loudly down the long hallway. He remained calm, his eyes devoid of hatred, only the cold concentration of a man accustomed to leading hundreds of people in life or death meetings. A security guard opened the door and motioned for him to enter. Inside, the room was bright white and simple, with a metal table. Richard sat there, his arms folded, his eyes cold and arrogant. Elias stopped, standing opposite. There were only a few feet between them, but the air felt thick. Lorraine stood behind him, her hand on Amara's shoulder, squeezing gently. Richard curled his lips. "Ah, the famous CEO. Are you here to teach me manners?" His voice was full of sarcasm. Elias looked at him, not responding immediately. He pulled out a chair and sat down opposite him, his eyes never leaving the other person. "I came to ask you something." Richard raised an eyebrow. "What, why? Why did I kick her? I told you. She was blocking my way." "No, not because of that." Elias spoke slowly, enunciating each word. "Why do you think you have the right to do that?" Richard laughed. "Maybe because the world still allows me. You know that better than anyone. Right, Elias didn't blink. The world may allow you, but that doesn't give you the right to violate a child's dignity. Richard tilted his head, his voice filled with contempt. You know, Barrett, you think you're special because you're a respected black CEO, but in their eyes, you're just a poster boy for diversity, a pawn. Lorraine took a deep breath, about to say something, but Elias raised a hand to stop her. His eyes never left Richard. You may be right. I may just be a symbol people use to make themselves look good. But that doesn't give you the right to kick a child. Doesn't make you right. Richard leaned back, a half smile on his face. You don't understand. That girl is your daughter. You took my place at AERION when I was fired. I worked for you. Remember, you fired me because I didn't fit your values. And now you're taking that value back in my own way. Lorraine was stunned. Elias remained calm, but his eyes darkened. So that kick wasn't just a spontaneous act. No, Richard replied, his voice full of complacency. It was revenge. Small, but worth it. In that moment, Lorraine felt Elias's hand tighten, but he didn't stand up, didn't get angry. He just said softly, enough so that each word fell heavily in the room, You chose to kick my son instead of looking me in the eye. That says everything about you. A policeman standing near the door stirred slightly, as if ready to intervene if there was a conflict. But Elias just stood up, adjusted his jacket. He looked at Richard for a few more seconds, then said, I don't need to be right. I just need the world to see it. He left the room, Lorraine and Amara following. Richard sat there, smiling faintly, unaware that his every word was being recorded. Outside, sunlight streamed down onto the floor, reflecting off Elias's tense face. Lorraine walked beside him, asking softly, What will you do? Bring the truth to light. You know how they're going to react. A black man reporting discrimination and the CEO of a defense company. 2. Some people are going to want you to be quiet. Elias paused, looking back at the still station plane. Silence doesn't make things go away. It just makes you believe you can do it again. Lorraine bowed her head, saying nothing more. She understood what he was saying. This was no longer Amara's story. It was the story of thousands who had been treated as if they did not exist. The group was escorted to a private area. A representative of the airline, a white man in a suit, stepped out, his voice professional. Mr. Barrett, we are very sorry for the incident. The airline is cooperating with the authorities. However, we hope you will not announce this incident to the media until the investigation is complete. Elias looked him straight in the eye. Why? Because it could have a negative impact on the company's image. Lorraine laughed dryly. And what about this girl's picture? The agent was embarrassed. Elias spoke softly but firmly. You worry about your image. I worry about my daughter. And about the children who will be treated like her if I remain silent. No one said anything more. The meeting ended in silence. That evening, when Elias returned home, he sat alone in his study. The small room had only a laptop on the table, a cold cup of coffee, and a photo of Amara smiling by the lake from last year. He pulled up the video on his phone, the clip Mr. Brown had sent him. He watched it frame by frame, not missing a single detail. When the kick hit, he closed his eyes briefly and took a deep breath. Then he opened his eyes, his gaze determined. He clicked Send Email. Recipient Seattle Chronicle, CNN, The Atlantic, Attachment Video, Evidence, MP4. On the note, he wrote only 4 words. The truth matters. The wind blew in from outside, shaking Amara's picture frame. He looked at it, smiled slightly, and told himself, she will grow up in a better world, no matter the cost, across town, in an interrogation room. Richard Hale received a call. A cold voice came over the phone. You talk too much. Richard, Don't forget who paid you." Richard frowned. "What do you mean, I mean? Don't let things fall into the wrong hands." The call ended. Richard looked around, sweat beading on his forehead. He was beginning to realize that this was more than a kick. The next morning, Atlanta woke up to another storm. Not rain, but a media storm. The video of Richard Hale's kick went viral on social media within hours of its release. From Twitter to Facebook, from CNN to Fox News, everyone was talking about the same thing. Prominent black CEO accuses white passenger of assaulting his 10-year-old daughter. Elias Barrett's living room was bathed in the blue glow of the television. The news channels played back images that were blurry but eerily clear, the swift kick, Amara's low scream, then Richard's stony face. Lorraine stood by the window, arms folded, eyes following each frame. Elias sat quietly in his chair, a cold cup of coffee in front of him. He said nothing. Amara sat in the middle, hugging a small teddy bear, staring at the screen where people were talking about themselves. The host's voice rang out, clear and cold. "Some say Mr. Richard Hale's actions could be misinterpreted as a natural reflex. However, others believe this was blatant racism." The scene cuts to another program. The female host speaks quickly and sharply. Elias Barrett, the first black CEO of a defense technology company, is now at the center of a new controversy. Is he using this incident to attract attention? Lorraine couldn't stand it anymore and turned off the TV. They're so shameless. Elias did not respond. He just stared silently into the empty space ahead. That is how they operate. When the truth is not beneficial, they will make the person who tells the truth a problem. Lorraine turned back, her voice harsh. "But this is your child. Elias. They are hurting a child." Elias raised his head and looked at her. His eyes were calm, but there was something deep inside a weariness, a familiar wound. "I know. But if we react with anger, they'll say, it's the black man's instinct. If we stay silent, they'll say, he must know he's wrong. No matter what, they win." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the back garden, where the sunlight filtered through the dew-covered leaves. "But this time, Lorraine, I won't be silent. Not because I want justice for myself, but because Amara needs to grow up in a world that fears truth, not power." The door to the room opened. David, his assistant, walked in, his face worried. "Sir, Pacific Air has just issued a statement. They said there is no evidence that passenger Richard Hale was intentionally violent. And they stressed that the airline does not tolerate any false accusations that affect the company's reputation." Lorraine glared. "False accusations. Are they kidding?" Elias raised his hand to signal her to calm down. He looked at David. "Have they called me yet?" "No, sir. But Fox News invited you on tonight. They want to hear it straight from the inside." Elias smiled faintly, a smile devoid of joy. They don't want to hear. They want a scene to exploit. Lorraine stepped forward. "So what are you going to do up here?" he said softly. "But not to explain, but to tell of something bigger than they expected." That afternoon, he arrived at the TV station. The waiting room was bright, the smell of coffee mixed with the bright lights of cameras. The host, Mark Taylor, was known for his tough interviews. He walked over and shook Elias's hand with a polite smile. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Barrett. I hope this helps clear things up." Elias nodded calmly. "I hope so." As the lights came on, the camera pointed straight at him. Elias looked straight into the lens, his eyes steady, not angry, not afraid. Mark began. "Mr. Barrett, there are suggestions that you are using this case for political pressure. How do you respond?" Elias replied slowly, each word clear. "Do you have children, Mark?" The host was surprised and paused. "I have an 8-year-old girl." Elias nodded. If a stranger kicked your child, right in front of everyone, and the whole world said, maybe she did something wrong, what would you call that? Mark was silent. For a few seconds, the studio was silent. I'm not looking for attention, Elias continued. I'm looking for the truth. Because when people are silent, violence is legitimized. When the media chooses to doubt victims instead of taking action, we teach our children that justice can be bought. The camera lingered on his face for a few seconds. Several members of the crew looked at each other, speechless. After the broadcast, the clip was cut and went viral. The hashtags Justice for Amara and Armand Truth Matters flooded Twitter. Many black people, Asian people, and even white people wrote "We stand with Elias Barrett." But at the same time, another wave emerged. Anonymous accounts spread rumors Elias made up stories to make himself look good. A conservative news site posted CEO Barrett, hero or media manipulator Lorraine, read through the comments on her phone, feeling her heart sink. Elias. They are dividing public opinion. They are making people forget the main thing, that a child was attacked. That is their way, Elias replied, his voice strangely calm. When they cannot refute the truth, they tire people out of arguing about it. That evening, after the lights were out, Lorraine went out onto the porch and looked up at the sky. The city lights were dim, but she could still see the distant stars. She wondered how many other parents were looking at the same sky, wondering what their children would face tomorrow. Inside, Elias was still awake. He sat at his computer, reading hundreds of emails from messages of support to threats. One email made him stop. Sender unknown. The content had only one line. If you keep talking, someone will keep silent for you. Elias stared at the text, his gaze unwavering. He deleted the email, then played Amara's video again. The girl in the photo smiled brightly, unaware that her smile was about to become the symbol of a movement. He spoke softly, his voice low, almost a whisper. My child, when the truth scares people, that is when it is doing its job. Across town. Richard Hale watched the news in his temporary apartment. His face was tense. The phone rang again. The familiar, mysterious male voice rang out, cold as steel. We don't want Mr. Barrett talking anymore. Find a way to shut him up. We'll take care of the rest. Richard was silent. For the first time, a flash of real fear appeared in his eyes. Elias Barrett. His house in the northern suburbs of Atlanta is surrounded by maple trees that have begun to turn a light red. It's early fall. The afternoons are getting cooler, and weak sunlight filters through a thin layer of cloud over the small pond in the yard, making the water look like gold. Inside, the kitchen smelled of roast chicken and vegetables. Everything was as normal as any other day, except the people were different. Elias sat at the head of the table, wearing a white shirt with 2 buttons open at the collar. On the table was a plate of almost untouched food. Lorraine Jenkins sat opposite, holding a glass of red wine, her eyes looking at Amara Barrett, who was silently pushing a potato chip on her plate, not saying a word. Outside the window, the leaves were falling slowly. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, as if to keep time. The room was filled with silence, a silence that did not come from peace, but from things no one knew how to say. Elias looked at his daughter. Eat up, Amara. The chicken is getting cold. The little girl nodded, cut off a small piece, but didn't eat it. Lorraine put down her glass, trying to find something to break the silence. Tomorrow is Friday. Do you want to go to school? I can take you. Amara shook her head. I don't want to. Elias frowned slightly. Why, I'm scared. My friends might be watching TV. They'll ask me questions. I don't know what to say. Her voice was small and trembling. Lorraine looked at Elias, but he remained silent. After a moment, he spoke slowly. almost in a whisper. "You don't have to say anything. The truth speaks for itself." Amara looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "But they won't believe me." Elias bowed his head, silent for a few seconds. Then he stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the garden lights were on, illuminating his face, tired, but still determined. "You know, some people spend their whole lives proving they're trustworthy, but you don't have to do that. You just have to know who you are." The little girl looked at her father, her eyes shining. "So who am I?" Daddy Elias turned back, his eyes soft, smiling slightly. "You are my daughter, and you deserve respect. Not because of who I am, but because of who you are." Lorraine fell silent. There was something in Elias's voice that reminded her of the early days of his company, the same voice, full of faith in humanity. But now, that faith was against society. She let out a small breath. "Elias, do you think you're putting your family in the eye of the storm? I'm not saying you're wrong, but they won't let it go." Elias returned to the table, poured more water, his voice calm. "Lorraine, I've lived in storms all my life. Only this time, I'm not hiding in a cabin." Lorraine was silent. She knew he was right, but she could still see the underlying worry in his eyes, fear not for himself, but for Amara. The phone rang. Elias looked down at the screen. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered, "Mr. Barrett." The voice was male, cold, distant. "We represent Pacific Air. We want an amicable settlement, a generous settlement. All we need is for you to sign a waiver stating that you will not make any further statements to the press." Elias was silent for a few seconds. He looked at his daughter, who was leaning her head on Lorraine's shoulder. "No." The voice on the other end paused. "Excuse me. What did you say?" "I say, no," Elias said slowly. "Justice is not for bargaining." He hung up. Lorraine sighed. "Do you know what they're going to do next?" Elias nodded. "I know. They will smear us. They will make up stories. But if we keep quiet, they will think they can buy the truth." He turned to Amara. "Go to your room and rest. You have an online class tomorrow." Amara nodded, walked up the stairs, stopped at the middle step, turned back. "Daddy, what is it?" "Son, I'm not scared anymore. I'm just sad because he didn't apologize." Elias smiled sadly. "Sometimes people don't apologize because they don't think they're wrong. But I don't need an apology to move on." The little girl nodded slightly, then continued walking. Her small figure disappeared up the stairs. Lorraine sat back at the table, her eyes thoughtful. "You're right, but sometimes I wish you could take a day off. Just one day, without fighting anyone." Elias chuckled. "If you quit, who will teach them that we cannot be bought?" Lorraine shook her head, then chuckled. "You're stubborn." "Barrett, not stubborn," he replied. "It's determined." There was a comfortable silence. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. Crickets chirped. For the first time in days, the house seemed peaceful. Lorraine cleared the table. Elias stood up and went out onto the porch. He looked up at the sky, where the moon was hidden behind the clouds. His phone vibrated in his hand. New text message. "Sender, Mr. Brown, Seattle Chronicle reporter. Message: I have information. Someone from within AERION is tampering with the case data. Be careful." Elias looked at the text, clutching his phone. The light from the screen fell on his face. His eyes were both tired and alert. He wasn't surprised. He just said quietly, as if to himself, "I guessed it." Lorraine called from inside the house. "Aren't you coming in?" Elias replied softly. "Come right in." He put the phone in his pocket and looked up at the sky. A plane flew overhead, its lights flashing. For a moment, he remembered that flight, the kick, the scream, Richard's blank eyes. He took a deep breath and said softly, "It's just the beginning." The door closed behind him. Inside, a warm light shone. Lorraine placed a blanket on the sofa where Amara had fallen asleep watching cartoons. She pulled the blanket up to her little girl's chest and whispered, "Sleep well, my strong daughter." Then she looked up the stairs, where Elias stood in the shadows, silent, his eyes on his daughter. Neither of them said anything, but they both knew tomorrow would not be easy. That night, Atlanta was raining lightly. Rain pattered against the windows, whispering like a distant whisper in his office. Elias Barrett sat at his wooden desk, warm yellow light illuminating his face. On his computer screen, Mr. Brown's email was still visible. "Someone from inside AERION tampered with the case data. Be careful." He closed his eyes. The sound of the rain mixed with the sound of the wind, reminding him of something far away, a memory he had always kept hidden, like a scar that would never heal. He stood up, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out an old oak box. Inside were faded photos, a school diploma, and a worn picture of a boy about 8 years old standing in front of a small house on the outskirts of Birmingham. Elias Barrett back then, a skinny boy, big eyes, always looking straight into the lens as if trying to prove that he existed. He touched the photo and smiled. Then he closed his eyes, letting his memories take him back to those years. Elias lived with his mother, Marion Barrett, who worked 2 jobs a day, a laundromat in the morning and a hospital cleaner at night. His father left when he was 4. Marion never complained, saying, "Eli, you don't have to be anything. Just don't let anyone make you think you're less than them." But the outside world is not as easy as Mother said. He remembered that morning, a cold winter, the snow-covered path to school. Elias was wearing an old coat, holding a notebook. When he entered the classroom, a group of white kids pointed at him. "Hey, you poor thing! What are you doing here? This school is for smart people." Elias bowed his head and did not answer. Another kid threw an eraser and hit him on the forehead. Laughter rang out. The teacher saw it, but only said softly, "Everyone, be quiet." No one was punished. No one apologized. And Elias learned the first lesson of his life. There are things that go wrong, and adults will look the other way. That evening, when his mother came home late, he asked Mom, "Why do they hate me without knowing who I am, Mrs.?" Marion sat down, wiped the sweat from her forehead, and looked at her son, because they never had to think about other people's fears. "My son, but you must learn to understand that, because you will need a stronger heart to survive." From that day on, Elias began to learn to be silent. He did not argue, did not protest, just observed. He read books, listened to the news, learned about the world, and silently promised himself that one day he would stand where no one could ignore him anymore. Then, at 16, his mother died in a car accident on her way home from her night shift. That night, Elias sat in the empty house, holding a picture of his mother, listening to the clock ticking. He cried silently. Then his neighbor, Mr. Joseph, a retired black engineer, walked over and put his hand on his shoulder. "Son, don't let your pain turn you into a bitter person. Let it teach you how to change what people think is impossible." That was the first time Elias heard the phrase "change the impossible," and he lived by it all his life. He worked, studied, rose through the ranks, received a scholarship to MIT, and gradually became the first black person to lead a leading defense company in America. But deep down, the memory of that 8-year-old boy was still there, not resentful, but never forgotten. He opened his eyes, looked at the photo on the table, and smiled slightly. "I didn't let them make me feel less than I was. Mom." Suddenly there was a knock at the door. Lorraine Jenkins entered, holding 2 cups of hot tea. "I guess you're not asleep." Elias smiled. "You guessed right." She put down her teacup and looked around. "What are you looking at?" "I look back at my childhood." He held up the photo. This boy, who thought justice was only for others. Lorraine sat down in the chair opposite. And now, that boy is trying to bring justice to his daughter. Elias looked at her and nodded slightly. "Actually, I don't want to fight. Lorraine, I just want to live in peace, work, and raise my children. But there are things that if you don't face, your children will have to face for you." Lorraine was silent. She knew what it felt like. Over the years as a nanny, she had seen black children forced to grow up too quickly because society denied them the freedom to be carefree. "Are you ever afraid?" Elias, she asked softly. "Every day," he replied, his voice as soft as a breath. "But fear doesn't mean I stop. It just reminds me that I still have something to lose." He sipped his tea. The scent of cinnamon wafted through the air. "My mother used to say, 'Don't let them teach you fear.' Maybe that's why I chose this path, even though I knew it was risky." Lorraine smiled, her eyes warm. "Do you know why I always stay with your family?" Elias looked at her, slightly surprised. "Because I believe in people like you. People who understand that change doesn't come from anger, but from perseverance and kindness." Elias smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Thank you, Lorraine." Outside, the rain continued to fall steadily. A gust of wind blew through the window, causing the photograph of his mother to shake slightly. Elias walked over, straightened the photograph, and placed it beside the one of Amara. He looked at the two faces, one from the past, one from the future, and said softly, as if in promise, "You will not have to grow up in fear like I did." Lorraine stood up and touched his shoulder lightly. "You should get some sleep. Tomorrow is a long day." Elias nodded. She left, closing the door behind her. In the room, there was only him and the sound of the rain. He sat down, opened his laptop, and began to write. Not a plan, not a report, but a letter to his daughter. "Amara, when you grow up and hear this story again, you will see that the world can be very cruel at times. But don't let that make you lose faith. Because in the darkness, there are still people who choose to stand up, not because they are strong, but because they don't want anyone else to suffer anymore." He saved the letter, turned off the computer, and looked up at the sky. Outside, the rain had not stopped, but something in his heart felt lighter, as if old memories had finally been forgiven. The night in Atlanta was unusually long. The sky cleared after the rain, but the air was still heavy. A faint moonlight streamed through the window, reflecting off the desk where Elias Barrett sat, his eyes fixed on the computer screen. On the screen were a jumble of data, an internal report Mr. Brown had sent over, containing leaked documents from inside AERION, hidden files, encrypted notes, and a name that kept appearing: Henderson Group. Elias frowned. Henderson, a security consulting firm that worked with the government, was well known for its expertise in communication crisis management. He wondered why would such a firm be involved in his case. The phone on the desk rang. The screen only read, "Unknown caller." Elias hesitated for a few seconds, then picked up, "Mr. Barrett." The voice rang out deep, cold, and clearly that of a man accustomed to controlling others. "I think it's time we talked." Elias was silent. "Who are you, the person who is trying to help you save your career?" "By threatening me?" Elias asked, his voice calm. The other end of the line chuckled. "Threat, no. Just advice. You're making a lot of enemies. Mr. Barrett, you should know that Henderson Group is more than just a media consultant. We have ways to make things disappear." Elias leaned back in his chair. "Even the truth. Of course, the truth only exists when people remember it." Elias looked at the photo of Amara on the table, his gaze slowing. "What do you want?" "It's simple. Drop the charges." We'll hold Richard Hale accountable to the fullest extent, and you will remain clean. You understand? A black CEO shouldn't disrupt the system you benefit from." The last sentence rang out, cold as steel. Elias took a deep breath, then said softly, "You are right. I have profited from the system, but only to fix it." The other man's voice dropped. "Don't try to be a hero. Barrett, the world doesn't need another Martin Luther King." Elias smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but I need my daughter to believe that justice still exists." He hung up, without a second's hesitation. The room was silent, except for the soft ticking of the clock. Elias sat still, his eyes fixed on the window. In the darkness, his face was hard, but there was a storm in his eyes waiting to be unleashed. A few minutes later, he picked up the phone and called Mr. Brown. "Brown, I need to see you. Tonight. Where to meet the stairs behind the old station. No one is watching there." 30 minutes later. Elias drove the black SUV to the abandoned train station on the outskirts of the city. The rain had just stopped, leaving a mist on the road. The headlights cast a cold, isolated feeling on the rusted metal sheets. Mr. Brown was waiting. He was a thin, middle-aged man in a gray coat, holding a camera. "You seem to be making more of a splash than I thought. Barrett." Elias handed him a USB. "Here's the call from earlier. I recorded it." Brown looked at him, frowning slightly. "You're playing with fire." "No," Elias replied. "I'm just lighting up a room they don't want anyone to see." Brown chuckled, half admiring, half worried. "You know who Henderson is? They have contracts with the government, the military, and the media. They wipe people out without anyone knowing they ever existed." Elias looked straight at him. "Then you have to post it faster than they can delete it." Brown was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. "You're right, but this will cost you everything." Elias chuckled. "If I keep quiet, I will lose too." They exchanged a quick word, then parted ways. Elias got back in his car and drove home, but as they turned off the main road, he realized something was wrong. The rear lights shone straight into the mirror, following closely. A black car with tinted windows. Elias tried to turn left, but the other car followed. He took a deep breath, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Years of driving instinct made him calculate quickly. The road ahead had a fork leading to an abandoned construction site, where the city's security cameras were. He accelerated, turning sharply. The car behind him suddenly followed suit, its wheels skidding on the wet ground, but it did not stop. Elias rushed through the gate and stopped the car right under the lamppost. He opened the door and got out. The other car stopped a few meters away. The car door opened and a man in a black coat stepped out. "Richard Hale?" Elias stopped. "What are you doing here?" Richard stepped closer, his eyes panicked, a far cry from their previous arrogance. They're after me. Barrett. I have no one else to trust. They say I've said too much." Elias looked at him, his voice cold. "You want me to help. You have to help me. I have proof, letters, contracts, emails, everything between me and Henderson. They hired me to provoke you. The incident on the plane was no accident. The wind blew, carrying the smell of damp metal and rust." Elias looked at him, silent for a few seconds. "You kicked my son to trigger a media plan?" Richard bowed his head, his voice trembling. "I was stupid. I didn't think it would go this far. I just wanted the money, but now I'm being erased from all records. I'm scared. Barrett." Elias took a deep breath, anger rising, but he held it in. "Give me everything you have." Richard pulled a small USB drive out of his shirt, trembling. "This is the only copy. You know I can't go to the police. They're everywhere." Elias reached out to take it, but at that moment there was a bang, short, dry, precise. Richard collapsed to the ground, Elias rushed over, but saw only blood on the cement floor. He raised his head and looked around. No one was in sight. Just the sound of the wind and the flickering streetlights. He clutched the USB drive, breathing heavily. It had all happened so fast. But he knew one thing: he had gone too far to turn back now. He drove away, his heart pounding, his eyes still fixed on the horizon, where the faint lights of the city illuminated the sky. In his mind, there was only one thought: they kill to keep quiet. That means they fear the truth. When she got home, Lorraine opened the door, her face pale. "Where did you go without telling me?" I heard an explosion near the highway. Elias looked at her, his voice low and hoarse. "I just saw Richard. He's dead." Lorraine stepped back, her hands shaking. "Oh my God." He set the USB drive on the table. "But he left this, and we're going to use it." He looked up the stairs. Amara was standing on the top step, hugging her teddy bear, her eyes worried. Elias smiled, though his heart was still churning. "It's okay, son. It's just a grown-up thing." The girl nodded slightly and went back into the room. Lorraine approached, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Are you sure you want to go on?" Elias looked at the USB, his eyes like a small flame in the long night. Justice does not come by stopping halfway. Outside, the wind picked up, coming in long gusts. A new storm was coming. The next morning, a weak light filtered through the thin mist. Elias Barrett's house was as quiet as ever, but inside, everything had changed. At the dining table, amid the smell of freshly brewed coffee, Lorraine Jenkins watched silently as Elias plugged the USB drive into his laptop. His face was serious, his eyes focused. The screen lit up, displaying a series of encrypted files. "This is what Richard Hale died for," Elias said quietly. "If what is in here is true, we are not just dealing with a man. We are dealing with a system." Lorraine swallowed. "Are you sure you want to open it? They might have a digital trap, like tracking software." Elias smiled tiredly. "If they're following me, it means I'm on the right track." He opened the first file. A series of documents appeared: emails, invoices, mysterious payments to an account belonging to Henderson Media Solutions. In the subject lines of many of the emails, the name Project Silent Sky appeared repeatedly. Project Silent Sky Lorraine repeated, frowning. Elias continued, his voice low. A media campaign to control public perception through staged events. The goal to test social reactions to racially charged incidents, while also providing political leverage to large corporations. Lorraine paled. "You mean that kick? It was all staged." Elias nodded. "Partly. They chose Richard because they knew I would react. They wanted to see how much of an impact a powerful black man would have if he were victimized. And then they could manipulate public opinion the way they wanted." The room fell silent. Lorraine clenched her fists. "It's sick." Elias nodded. "But it is true. And now, I have proof." He pulled out his phone and called Mr. Brown. "Brown, I looked at the data. We have to go public now." Brown's hoarse voice came from the other end of the line. "Be careful. Elias, my office just got raided. They're citing national security as the reason. They want to get all the records related to your case." Elias clenched his fists. "So they're doing something." "Yes. I have the data backed up elsewhere. But you should know, they don't just want to erase the evidence. They want you gone." Elias' voice was low. "If I disappear, let Amara know. I did this for her." Brown was silent for a moment, then said, "Don't talk like that. We haven't lost. Send me a copy of the data. I have someone at CNN ready to broadcast if there is confirmation." Elias nodded. "I will send it right away." After hanging up, he copied the entire file, encrypted it, and sent it to Brown. Lorraine looked at him. her eyes worried. "You're risking your life." Elias replied softly, "If the truth is not worth the risk, then what do we live for?" That afternoon, Elias arrived at the AERION office. The place, once a symbol of his dream, had become a battlefield. When he entered, everyone fell silent. Their eyes looked at him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Assistant David ran over, his voice urgent. "Sir, someone from the board of directors wants to see you. They said it's urgent." 17th floor conference room, closed glass doors. Inside was James Holloway, chairman of the board, a silver-haired man in a gray suit, with a calm smile. "Elias," he said, "I hear you're involved in the Henderson scandal." Elias looked at him straight in the eye. "I'm not getting involved. I'm exposing it." Holloway sighed. "I advise you to stop. AERION has a lot of defense contracts. If you continue, the whole company will be implicated. You will drag us down with you. If justice can damage a company's reputation, then that reputation deserves to be damaged," Elias replied coldly. Holloway chuckled. "You think you're a hero? No hero survives against the system that nurtured them." Elias did not reply. He stood up, opened the door, turned around and said softly, "You don't need to survive to change the world. Just live, Mr." Holloway looked on, his eyes a mixture of fear and admiration. Evening fell. Elias drove home, his mind reeling. As they reached the intersection, a truck suddenly ran a red light and headed straight for him. He swerved in time, but the truck skidded and crashed into a lamppost. The airbag deployed, and his head spun. A man in a work uniform approached and looked through the glass door. His eyes were cold and emotionless. He said into the walkie-talkie, "He's not dead. He's still alive." Before Elias could react, police sirens blared in the distance. The man was gone. Elias forced the door open and stepped out. Blood was dripping from his forehead, but he remained standing. A young officer ran over. "Mr. Barrett, are you okay?" He took a deep breath. "Fine, but I don't think—" It was an accident. When he returned home, it was dark. Lorraine ran out, panicked. "Elias, oh my God, you're hurt. It's okay. We have to get out of here now. They know I have the data." Lorraine nodded and quickly gathered her things. Amara ran down the stairs, confused. "Daddy, what happened?" Elias bent down and took his son's hand. "We're just going on vacation, honey. But this time, no plane tickets." The girl nodded, her eyes still filled with worry. Lorraine helped them into the car, carrying the backup hard drive. They drove through the dark streets, out into the northern suburbs. As they left the city, Elias looked in his mirror, in the distance. The headlights of other cars were still following, but at a safe distance. Lorraine whispered, "Do you think they will stop?" Elias replied, his eyes never leaving the road. "But they will know. I am not easily erased." That night, they stopped at a small lakeside motel. Elias locked the door and turned on his laptop. He opened his email and saw a message from Brown Video, ready to go at 9 a.m. Prepare for the consequences. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. The water lapped gently against the shore. Lorraine put a hand on his shoulder. "Are you scared, Elias?" He opened his eyes and looked out at the lake. "Yes, but fear is what makes a man alive." She smiled softly, her voice low. "And what makes you not stop?" He replied without hesitation. "The belief that someone is watching. A child will learn that the truth is never wrong." Lorraine looked at him, in the dim light, his face looking both tired and strong, the image of a man fighting no longer for himself, but for the next generation. Outside, the sky was thick with clouds. A flash of lightning illuminated the lake. Elias closed his eyes and said softly, "Tomorrow they will know, and I will not be silent any longer." That morning, the sky was a hazy gray. as if covered with a thin layer of smoke. The morning mist was so thick on the lake that Elias could hear the sound of drops of water falling from the eaves onto the wooden surface. He sat in the small room of the lakeside lodge, his laptop open in front of him. Lorraine Jenkins and Amara Barrett were still asleep in the next room. The clock read 8:55 a.m., only 5 minutes before Mr. Brown's video was to air. Elias looked down at his hand, the blood drying from the wound on his forehead. Every movement stung, but he ignored it. He thought of his mother, of what she had said. Don't let them make you feel like you're less than. Today, he would let the world hear it. 8:59. The phone rang. It was Brown. Elias? Are you sure? Once I press the button, there will be no turning back. Elias took a deep breath. Do it. If we keep quiet, they will believe they are right. A second of silence. Then Brown said, Okay, you should turn on CNN. Elias turned on the TV. The screen lit up, the CNN logo clearly visible. The host spoke in a serious tone. Breaking news. Henderson Group is accused of manipulating the media and orchestrating social events for political purposes. Documents provided by AERION CEO Elias Barrett. Immediately after, the screen switched to the video that was shown nationwide. The first image shows Richard Hale signing a contract with Henderson's representatives. Next comes a series of emails, invoices, and a recording of a deep voice, the same one that called Elias the night before. The voice says coldly, We'll see how the public reacts to a black CEO being attacked. It's all data. Elias stared at the screen, feeling as if time had stopped. Not because of fear, but because of the knowledge. This would change everything. As the video ended, the newsroom returned. The anchor quickly said, The initial reaction on social media was explosive. The hashtags #Silent Sky and Negro Truth Matters topped the charts in just 10 minutes. Some politicians are calling for a federal investigation. Elias sat still, his eyes still glued to the screen. Lorraine came out, her hair still tangled, and stopped when she saw the scene. Oh my God! You did it! He nodded, his voice low but calm. It can't be hidden anymore. Lorraine approached, half frightened, half admiring. You just shocked the country. Amara ran out of the room, still in her pajamas, her voice panicked. Daddy, they're talking about me on TV. Elias bent down and picked up the child. He's fine. Now they know the truth. The little girl looked at her father, her eyes filled with pride and fear. Will they stop hating me? Then Elias paused, his heart constricting in his chest. They may still hate you, my dear, but at least they get to see you now. The phone on the table buzzed. Texts, emails, notifications. Lorraine looked at it. CNN, Washington Post, The Guardian, even BBC. They all want to interview you. Elias smiled faintly. I don't need an interview. The truth has already been told. But the peace didn't last long. 3 hours later, Brown called back, his voice urgent. Elias, they're fighting back. A conservative network just released a fake, edited video of you accepting money from a political opponent. They say you staged the whole thing to destroy Henderson. Elias closed his eyes and took a deep breath. I expected that. But can you prove that the video is fake? I'm trying, but they're fast. Anti-you articles are flooding in. Some even want to investigate you for fabricating lies and treason. Lorraine looked at Elias, her face pale. I told you they wouldn't leave you alone. Elias opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, looking out at the still lake. They may lie, but the truth is not dead. It is merely buried. He raised his head to look up at the sky, his voice slow, as if he was telling the whole world, Justice does not need anyone's permission to exist. In the afternoon, Elias and Lorraine dropped Amara off at the motel. As they got in the car, his phone rang again, This time, it was James Holloway's number. Elias. His voice was strained. You must withdraw immediately. Henderson has evidence against you, documents from your time at MIT. If they make them public, you will lose everything. Elias replied coldly. If I had kept quiet, I would have been gone long ago. You don't understand. They control the media and the law. They can turn you into a criminal with just one line of text. Elias looked in the rearview mirror. Amara was sitting in the back, hugging the teddy bear, her eyes wide. If they can do that, he said softly, it makes my reason to continue all the greater. Holloway was silent. Finally he sighed, his voice heavy. You will not survive. Elias. Elias smiled slightly. Though no one saw, I don't need to survive. I just need them to know I don't bow my head. He hung up. That afternoon, television channels across America ran two conflicting stories, one praising Elias as a manipulative liar, the other calling him a manipulative liar. On social media, pictures of him and Amara were everywhere. Some prayed for them, others cursed them, but no one could deny they had made the country face itself. At night, Elias sat on the porch of the inn. Lorraine brought him a cup of hot coffee. How do you think it will end? Elias looked out at the lake, the moonlight reflecting in his eyes. Justice never ends. Lorraine, it only continues. Through each generation. I may not see that day, but my daughter will. Lorraine was silent. She knew he was right, but the worry was still evident in her eyes. Suddenly, Elias's phone rang. It was a text message from Brown. Elias. The FBI just opened an investigation into Henderson. They have a search warrant for the headquarters. We have a win. He looked at the words for a long time, then looked up and smiled slightly. I won. Mom, he whispered. Lorraine looked at him, a small smile on her lips. You may have just woken the world up, Elias. He smiled and replied softly, I just want my child not to be afraid when getting on a plane. A gentle breeze blew, carrying the scent of coffee and the scent of the night. In the distance, the sound of insects mixed with the sound of the lake waves, like a gentle melody of hope. Amara stepped out, still wearing her thin coat, and sat on her father's lap. Daddy, can we go home now? Elias stroked his son's hair, his voice warm. Not yet, my dear, but soon, when everything calms down. The little girl nodded, resting her head on his chest. Lorraine watched them, her eyes growing still. In that moment, the world seemed to stop. Somewhere in the city, TV screens still played Elias' video, his final words echoing, the truth doesn't need to be shouted. It just needs someone brave enough to speak it. 3 days after Elias Barrett's video was aired, the storm in America has not yet calmed down. Television channels continuously open special sections discussing the scandal of the century related to Henderson Group. One side sees Elias as a hero who dared to expose the dark power. The other side accuses him of being a traitor who deliberately created social chaos. Protests erupted in many states. In New York, thousands of people carrying Truth Matters signs marched down major avenues. In Texas, another group protested violently, chanting, "Stop the lies." Hundreds of thousands of comments were posted on social media every minute. The name Elias Barrett became a symbol of faith, of fear, and of division. In a small hotel on the outskirts, Elias watched it all on his laptop screen. His face was gaunt, his eyes dark from sleepless nights. Lorraine Jenkins placed a cup of hot coffee in front of him, her voice soft. You need to rest. Elias, you're going to burn out. He shook his head slightly. There is too much to do. Brown is being hunted. I cannot leave him alone. She sat down opposite him. You can't save the world. Elias smiled, a sad smile. I don't need to save the world. I just need the world to stop pretending it isn't broken. The phone rang, breaking the heavy atmosphere. Elias picked up. On the other end of the line was Mr. Brown's voice, panting and hoarse. Elias, they came for me. The newsroom is sealed. I'm in D.C., but someone is watching me. Elias jumped to his feet. Where are you? I'm coming. No, don't. You have to protect Amara. I'll hide for a few days. But listen, the FBI has arrested one of Henderson's directors. He's talking. They have evidence that Henderson is being funded by high-level politicians. A new storm is coming. Elias was silent, listening only to Brown's rapid breathing. You have to be careful. Don't let them silence you. Brown laughed softly, his voice hoarse. Have you forgotten? Elias, the truth cannot be silenced. You taught me that. The call ended. Elias sat down, his eyes staring blankly. Lorraine touched his shoulder. Good news, right? He nodded. Yes, but I fear something else. She frowned. What? That when the truth is revealed, people still don't want to believe it. That evening, the news broke. The FBI had seized thousands of documents from the Henderson Group, including evidence of news manipulation and massive bribes. But the most shocking thing was the client list, which included members of Congress and America's top CEOs. The news spread like a tidal wave across the country. Emergency meetings were called. Some were arrested. Others fled the country. But at the same time, new articles began to appear, accusing Elias of manipulating AI data in the AERION project for his own benefit. Lorraine saw the headline and threw the newspaper down on the table. This is ridiculous. They are bending everything to destroy you. Elias shrugged. I know, but I was prepared. She looked at him. Her voice choked. Don't you get tired? They've made you a target. Anyone can hate you, even if you're doing the right thing. Elias turned, his eyes softening. Lorraine, you know what tires me most. It's not the hatred. It's the silence of those who know the truth, but choose to stay out. Lorraine said nothing more. She just sat there, looking at him, her heart filled with sorrow. The next day, a CBS reporter contacted him, wanting to interview Elias in person. After several refusals, he agreed, not to protect himself, but to speak to the people one last time. On live television, Elias appeared with a calm face, bright eyes, and a deep, clear voice. 3 weeks ago, my daughter was attacked on a plane. From one small act, a whole system of power was revealed, a system that is willing to bend the truth to keep its position. I don't want war. I just want justice. But justice doesn't come by itself. It needs people to suffer to keep it alive. The host asked, do you regret it when the truth makes you lose your reputation, your company, your safety? Elias looked straight into the camera. I lost nothing. I only gave back what was never mine. Silence. The words echoed across America. Social media exploded. Some called him Martin Barrett, a nod to Martin Luther King. Others mocked him for playing the hero. But somewhere, among millions of people, a small awakening was spreading that something was wrong with the way the world worked. That night, Elias returned to the hotel room. Amara was fast asleep. Lorraine stood by the window, looking out at the city lights in the distance. Do you think they will forgive you? She asked. Her voice small. Elias sat down, took off his watch, and smiled slightly. Forgiveness. I don't need forgiveness. I just need fear. Lorraine turned back. Afraid of what? I'm afraid that there are still people in the world who dare to speak, he said, and looked over to the bed where Amara was sleeping. Her hair covered half her face, strangely peaceful. For a moment, Elias felt all his fatigue melt away. As long as she grows up in a world that knows how to ask questions, all this pain will be worth it, he whispered. Lorraine nodded slightly, her eyes brimming with tears. Did you ever think you would win? Elias? He looked up at the ceiling, where the light was reflected dimly. No one wins a war for the truth, but at least I won't lose by keeping silent. Outside, the sound of car horns faded away, blending into the silence of the night. The only sound in the room was Amara's steady breathing and the wind coming through the window. In the darkness, Elias sat still for a long time, his eyes fixed on the sky. A small star glimmered in the darkness, weak but persistent, like himself. It was raining. Cold raindrops were falling on the old tin roof of the small roadside hotel. The dim yellow light filtered through the curtains, illuminating the three figures in the small room. Elias Barrett sat silently in front of his laptop, still holding a cold cup of coffee. Lorraine Jenkins stood by the window, looking out. Outside on the wet street, a black car had been parked for over an hour without moving. "Elias," she said softly, "did you see? That car's still there? No lights on? No one out? I don't like this feeling at all." Elias nodded slightly, still looking at the screen. "They found us." He stood up and drew the curtains. "Get ready. We're leaving now." Lorraine panicked. "Where to go?" "You said the FBI was investigating Henderson. But what if they were being bribed too?" Elias breathed heavily, his eyes distant. "I trust no one. We will protect ourselves." He walked quickly to the bed, where Amara Barrett was sleeping, and gently picked up his daughter. She stirred slightly and said softly in her sleep, "Daddy, are we home yet?" Elias hugged his son tightly, his voice hoarse. "Almost there, my dear, but we have a little further to go." Lorraine quickly packed her things, stuffing them into a small bag. As they reached the door, an engine roared outside. Headlights shone brightly in the windows. "Run!" Elias shouted. The three of them rushed out the back door and down the narrow corridor that led to the hotel's back parking lot. Footsteps echoed from the front entrance. Lorraine looked back. Two dark figures in long coats were approaching, moving quickly and methodically. Elias unlocked the car, put Amara in the back seat, and got in the driver's seat. Lorraine had barely closed the door when a gunshot rang out. The rear window shattered. Amara screamed, panicked. Elias stepped on the gas, and the car shot out of the parking lot and into the rain. "Oh, my God!" Lorraine gasped. "They really are shooting." "Keep her head down," he shouted. "They don't want to arrest her. They want to end it here." The car skidded on the slippery road, splashing water everywhere. In the rear-view mirror, the black headlights behind the car were shining brightly, following closely. Elias turned the wheel and turned sharply into the small road leading into the forest. Lorraine held her breath, gripping the seat. "Do you know the way?" Elias chuckled. His voice choked. "I've run away from failed contracts that were more dangerous than this." The car hurtled over the old wooden bridge, skidding violently, but Elias kept his balance. Behind him, the black car was still chasing, the roar of its engine echoing through the night and the rain. Finally, they came to a small fork in the woods. Elias braked hard and turned off the headlights. The three of them sat in silence, listening only to their hearts pounding and the rain hitting the windows. The black car rushed around the corner, not realizing they had stopped. Elias took a deep breath, his voice hoarse. "Safe for now?" Amara asked tremblingly. "Daddy, who are they? Why do they want to harm us?" Elias turned back to look at his daughter. "Because we tell them what they want to hide. And sometimes, telling the truth scares people more than lying." Lorraine took Amara's hand and reassured her. "You're safe, sweetie. Everything will be okay." Elias looked out. "No, not yet. They will be back." He picked up the phone and dialed Mr. Brown. The signal was weak, only static. Finally, Brown's voice came through weak. "Broken, Elias. I was ambushed. Then the call was disconnected." Elias stared at the dark screen, his heart sinking. Lorraine recognized his expression. "Is that Brown? Is he okay?" He didn't answer. He just looked down at his hands, gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. After a few seconds of silence, he said softly, "They found him." Lorraine covered her mouth. "No, it can't be." Elias started the car again. "I'll get you two to safety. Then I'll come back for Brown." Lorraine shook her head. "No, are you crazy? You don't know who they are. You'll die." He turned, his voice unusually calm. "I can't let anyone else die for this. Not again." His gaze made Lorraine freeze. She knew she couldn't stop him, so she just held Amara's hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. That night, Elias drove through the woods, heading to an old cabin where an old friend used to live, Marcus Lee, a former cybersecurity engineer who had helped him on his first project at AERION. When the car stopped in front of the small house, the lights inside turned on. Marcus stepped out, wearing a thick coat and holding a flashlight. "Elias, my goodness, you look miserable." Elias smiled weakly. "Is there room for 3? Marcus nodded. "Come in. I heard the news. The whole country is talking about you." They entered. Amara sat by the fire. Lorraine prepared the blanket. Marcus pulled Elias aside and whispered, "You're being watched. Henderson's surveillance system is still active. They have eyes everywhere. But I can help you send the data internationally if you want it to live forever." Elias looked at him. "I just want it to go to people who believe in the truth." Marcus nodded, opened his laptop, and plugged in the hard drive Elias had brought with him. "I'll encrypt it and send it to multiple channels. Once it's broadcast, no one can erase it." While Marcus worked, Elias stepped out onto the porch. The rain had stopped. The sky was clear, but the clouds were still thick. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool, damp air, the moonlight filtering through the trees. Lorraine came over and put her coat on him. "Do you think they'll let you go?" Elias shook his head. "No, but they will have to see that there are things that cannot be turned off. Inside." Amara looked out the window at her father. She smiled slightly, a small smile in a chaotic world. After a moment, Marcus called out, "It's done. The data is uploading. But you should know, as soon as the signal goes off, they'll pinpoint our location." Elias turned back, his eyes shining. "Then I must leave." He picked up Amara and held Lorraine's hand. As they headed for the door, Marcus called out, "Elias, whatever happened, you did the right thing." Elias smiled. "Thank you, Marcus." The car drove away from the house. In the distance, in the woods, another engine sounded cold, steady, and coming closer. On the home computer screen, the data loading bar flashed to 99%. Marcus looked, then smiled. Almost done. But before he could say more, the glass door shattered. A dark figure rushed in, a gun glinting in the light. The last thing Marcus saw was the words flashing on the screen, "Upload complete." The night sky was still thick with clouds as Elias Barrett's SUV wound down the winding forest road. The rain had stopped, leaving only the damp smell of earth and leaves. Inside, Amara Barrett fell asleep, her head resting on Lorraine Jenkins' shoulder. Elias glanced in the rearview mirror, the dim light reflecting off his hard face. He felt a mixture of fear and calm, a strange feeling only someone who knew they were at their limit could understand. Lorraine asked softly, "Are you sure Marcus will have time to upload all the data?" Elias kept his eyes on the road. "I trust him. Marcus always keeps his word. But what if they catch him before he's done?" Elias gripped the steering wheel. "Then we'll continue. I still have the copy." Lorraine looked at him, sighing softly. "You don't know when to stop, do you?" He chuckled. "When the truth is seen, I will stop." Suddenly, the car shook. There was a ping. Elias's phone alerted him to a text message. He flipped it open, and the screen read, "Upload complete. We did it." He exhaled, as if a boulder had been lifted from his chest. Done. Lorraine looked at him, her eyes shining. Really, Elias nodded. The data has been spread globally. They can't erase it anymore. For a brief moment, the small car was filled with hope. But then another sound rang out, the sound of a helicopter in the distance. Lorraine looked out the window, her voice trembling. Elias, they found us. The helicopter flew low, its headlights scanning the forest, then stopped exactly where they were going. Elias stepped on the gas and turned onto the right trail. The engine roared. The helicopter descended, a strong gust of wind blowing leaves from the trees. Amara woke up, screaming in fear. Calm down, honey. Hold on tight to Miss Lorraine. Elias shouted. Bullets exploded. The rear window shattered. Lorraine ducked to shield Amara. Elias swerved around the corner, tires skidding in the mud. Ahead was a small wooden bridge spanning a shallow stream. Elias glanced quickly. The middle section was rotten. He had less than 3 seconds to decide. Lorraine shouted. Elias, stop, he replied softly, his eyes determined. No, we will fly. The car flew past, its entire body lifted off the ground, landing on the other side of the bridge with a loud crash. The wood behind it cracked. The helicopter stopped, unable to pass. Elias stopped the car, panting, sweat beading his forehead. Amara was crying, but safe. Lorraine held his hand, her eyes brimming with tears. You're crazy. Elias chuckled. Maybe. But we're alive. He turned off the headlights and drove a few more miles until the woods thinned. In the distance, the lights of a city appeared, Lorraine asked softly. Where are we going now? To Brown. If he's alive, we'll go public together. She was silent for a moment and then said, Do you believe he is still alive? Elias looked out the window. I have to believe. If I don't believe, I have nothing left to fight for. As they entered the northern suburbs, Elias's phone rang again. A strange text message. No sender name. Marcus is gone. They found him. He froze, his hand gripping the phone tightly. Lorraine looked at him. What is it? Elias did not reply. He only whispered, We must go to the city center immediately. 30 minutes later, they arrived at the old building where Brown had been using his temporary office. The front door was ajar. Inside, it was dark and eerily quiet. Stay in the car, Elias said. He opened the door and got in. The smell of cigarette smoke and dust hung heavy in the air. The desk was messy, papers scattered about. He walked slowly, listening for the slightest sound. Suddenly, a noise came from the corner of the room. Elias turned around. A figure stood in the shadows. Brown. A hoarse voice replied. It's me. Elias breathed a sigh of relief. Thank God. Are you okay? Brown stepped into the light, his face battered, his shirt torn, but his eyes still blazing. They caught me, but I escaped. Elias, the news is out. All of Europe is reporting it. Henderson is down. Elias stepped forward and shook his hand. Thank you. Marcus has... He choked, unable to continue. Brown nodded, his eyes sad. I know. He sacrificed for something bigger than himself. Before Elias could reply, a car stopped outside. They looked at each other. Brown said quickly, Go through the back door. I'll hold them off. Elias shook his head. No, I won't let anyone else die. But Brown had his gun out, his eyes determined. This is the only way. Get your daughter out of here. You must live. Elias, the truth must be told. Heavy footsteps approached. Brown took Elias's hand, his voice hoarse. Run. Keep the faith. Elias looked at him for a long second, then turned and ran out the back door. He raced to the parking lot where Lorraine and Amara were waiting and climbed into his car. Behind him, gunfire erupted. Amara shouted, Daddy, what is that noise? Elias choked out, It's okay. Son, Let's go." He drove away, his heart heavy. In the mirror, the building grew smaller, the red light from the windows reflecting off the night sky. On the way, Lorraine was silent. Finally, she said softly, "You know, they can kill everyone around you, but they can't kill what you started." Elias looked forward, his eyes dry. "They can kill the bearer of the truth, but they cannot kill the truth." In the distance, a large LED screen in the middle of the city showed a breaking news report. The host said, "Breaking news, Henderson Group is officially shut down." A series of leaked documents confirm interference in media and politics. FBI issues arrest warrants for key figures. Lorraine took his hand, her eyes brimming with tears. "You did it, Elias?" He didn't reply, just looked at Amara sleeping, her face peaceful in her mother's arms, amid the darkness and the rain. Elias felt a strange feeling, true peace. As the car turned onto the highway, he said softly, "Like a prayer, Marcus. Brown, we did it." The wind blew, sweeping away the raindrops that remained on the glass. Somewhere in the night, the sky began to lighten. The sky was lightening on Interstate 70. The first rays of sunlight shone on the windshield, reflecting off Elias Barrett's tired but peaceful face. After the long night, everything around them seemed strangely quiet. In the car, Amara Barrett was sleeping soundly, her head resting on Lorraine Jenkins' lap. She gently stroked her hair, her eyes sparkling in the morning sunlight. Elias looked through the rearview mirror, smiling slightly. "She sleeps like an angel." Lorraine nodded slightly. "She's been through so much. But, look, even after all that, she's still sleeping peacefully. It's a miracle. Perhaps that is God's way of telling us that, even if the world is in ruins, children still deserve to dream." Elias replied, his voice low. "A few more miles." The car left the highway and entered a small town in western Colorado, a place with long green mountains and a cool atmosphere. Elias chose a small roadside cafe with an old, faded sign, Sunny Hill Cafe, since 1978. He stopped the car. Lorraine gently shook Amara awake. She rubbed her eyes and asked softly, "Daddy, are we there yet?" Elias leaned down and kissed his daughter's forehead. "Okay, princess. We'll rest a bit." They entered the shop. The air inside was warm, and the smell of baked goods filled the air. An elderly woman with gray hair stood behind the counter and smiled warmly. "Good morning, everyone. Everything in here is a little old, but the coffee is still good." "That's good enough," Elias replied with a smile. They chose a table near the window. Lorraine sat Amara down and looked around. Everyone in the cafe was watching the morning news on the wall-mounted TV. The host said, "After the documents were leaked, the government announced a full investigation into the Henderson Group. Several senior figures were suspended. Meanwhile, the community praised the courage of former AERION CEO Elias Barrett, who dared to stand up to power and speak the truth." The whole cafe was dead silent. A few eyes turned towards Elias. Lorraine looked at him worriedly, but Elias just sipped his coffee, his voice as light as the wind. "It's okay. They have the right to know who I am." A man sitting at the next table, a railway worker, apparently turned slightly. "Are you really Barrett?" Elias put down his coffee cup. "Yes." The man stood up, walked over, and held out his hand. "I just wanted to say thank you. You have no idea. What you've done has made people like me believe that our voices matter." Elias squeezed his hand, his eyes sincere. "Thank you for your trust. Without that trust, I am nothing." The man nodded and returned to his seat. No one said anything more, but in their eyes, Elias saw something he had never seen before: genuine respect. After breakfast, Lorraine went ahead to the car with Amara. Elias stayed behind to pay. The older woman at the counter looked at him, smiling warmly. "I know who you are. You remind me of my husband. He was a journalist, fired for daring to write the truth. He died many years ago, but I think, if he were still alive, he would be proud of you." Elias was speechless, only bowing his head in thanks. When he stepped outside, the sun was high in the sky. A light breeze blew, carrying dry leaves. He started the car and turned onto the small road leading up into the mountains. In the distance, a small wooden house appeared, the old house of his old friend Marcus had mentioned, located in the middle of the valley. Lorraine was surprised. "You know this place Marcus once dreamed of building a place like this to live in peace," I thought. "At least we can fulfill that dream for him." They stopped in front of the house and got out. The air was fresh and peaceful. Amara ran around, laughing, picking wildflowers by the stream. Her laughter echoed through the valley, like the first light after a storm. Elias stood looking at his son, a smile slowly appearing on his lips. Lorraine approached, softly asking, "What are your plans next?" He thought for a moment and then said, "I will write. No more office, no more company. I will write about the truth, not to expose anyone, but to remind people that we can be better." Lorraine smiled. "A new chapter." "Huh, yeah, but not mine. All of ours." She looked at him, her eyes shining with confidence. "I'll stay if you need help typing." Elias chuckled. "I couldn't have written without you." Evening fell. They lit a fire on the porch. Amara sat on her father's lap and asked softly, "Daddy, can I tell you a story?" Elias nodded. "Of course." The little girl raised her head, her voice innocent. "Once upon a time there was a father. He was very brave. He had no sword, no armor, only his heart. And he saved the world by telling the truth." Lorraine was silent. Elias hugged her and whispered, "It's a beautiful story, my dear. But you forgot one thing. What that father did not save the world alone. He had people who believed in him." Amara smiled, leaning her head on her father's shoulder. As the sun set behind the mountains, the valley was bathed in orange light. Elias stood up and looked out into the distance, where the sky was tinged with purple. Lorraine came up to him. "Do you think the world will change?" He nodded slightly. "Slowly, but it will. Like this dawn, not all at once, but little by little." She looked at him and smiled. "You are still Elias Barrett, the one who never gives up. I'm just a father." "Lorraine," he replied, his voice low but warm. "And maybe that's why I never give up." Night fell. They sat by the fire, watching the embers float up into the sky like fragments of memory. In the darkness, Elias opened the notebook and wrote the first lines. "There are wars without guns. There is only truth and faith. And in the darkest moments, it is faith that saves us." Amara was asleep, Lorraine resting her head on his shoulder. Elias put down his pen and looked up at the starry sky. The moonlight illuminated his face, tired, but peaceful. For the first time in months, Elias felt truly at peace. No more bullets, no more chase, just the wind, his daughter's steady breathing, and the whisper of life. On the horizon, the faint light of a new dawn was slowly breaking. A new day, a new beginning for everything. 2 weeks after the Henderson Group data was released, America is still in turmoil. New commentary, talk shows all revolve around one name, Elias Barrett. From universities to street corner cafes, people were talking. Some called Elias the Quiet Storm. Others saw him as a rebel of the system. But no matter which side you stood on, no one could deny Elias had made the whole country look back. The news channel saw Elias holding his daughter on the porch of their wooden house. A candid photo, unobtrusive, just father and child, on a peaceful afternoon. The photo became a symbol of courage, fatherhood, and belief in what was right. That morning, Lorraine Jenkins opened her laptop. The screen was filled with news. She turned to Elias, who was making coffee at the stove. You should see this. Elias stepped closer. The headline on CNN's homepage read, "From CEO to Icon of Justice. Elias Barrett's story changes how America looks at power and right." He looked at the screen, silent. Lorraine asked softly, "How do you feel?" Elias shrugged, his voice as light as a breath. "I don't need them to call me a hero. I just need them to understand that. Silence is also a sin." Lorraine nodded. "But you know, sometimes society only changes when someone dares to be hated." Elias smiled, his eyes distant. "If so, I might have done enough." Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., Congress held its first public hearings on the Henderson affair. Dozens of politicians were investigated. Images of them bowing and apologizing in public were shown on television across the country. A silver-haired female senator rose to speak, "We let greed lead us," and a black man who dared to speak the truth become a target of power. Today, America must bow to the truth. The words echoed across social media, shared millions of times. Hashtags abounded. Truth matters. Elias effect. New America. In another corner of the country, a small Atlanta high school classroom showed the Elias interview during social studies class. The teacher told the students, "This is not just a story about discrimination. This is a story about courage. When one person stands up, the whole world listens." A black girl sitting in the back of the class whispered, "Teacher, I want to grow up and be like him." The whole class was silent, then applauded. Meanwhile, at the small house in the middle of the Colorado Valley, Elias maintained a simple life. He wrote every morning, walked with Amara every afternoon, and sat with Lorraine on the porch in the evenings, listening to old jazz. One evening, Lorraine turned on the small radio, and the host's voice rang out. "We just received news that engineer Marcus Lee's personal notes were discovered in the encrypted computer. The last line he wrote was, 'If I disappear, remember that we chose the right side.'" Lorraine choked. Elias closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He always knew what he was doing. "Do you regret it, Elias?" she asked. He opened his eyes and looked up at the starry sky. "Yes, I regret losing so many good people. But if I could do it all over again, I would do it again." Lorraine smiled sadly. "You're different from most people I've known," Elias replied softly. "No, I am just a man who is afraid, but still does what he believes is right." The next morning, Amar ran out onto the porch, newspaper in hand. "Daddy, your name is in there." Elias laughed and took the paper. On the cover was an article titled "More Than Justice: Truth and Kindness" by Elias Barrett. He read each line slowly. The author of the article was a young reporter, Sarah Cohen, a former student of Mr. Brown. In the article, she wrote, "Barrett not only exposes the truth, he reminds us that justice does not exist without humanity. And sometimes the greatest act is not to win, but to dare to lose for what is right." Elias folded the newspaper, his eyes shining with emotion. He looked at Lorraine and whispered, "Brown would be proud." Lorraine nodded, smiling. "He planted the seed. You just made it bloom." At the same time, in New York, a bronze statue was erected in a small park near Times Square. It was not a statue of a person, but of an open book. On the page was engraved the words, "Truth doesn't need a hero. It just needs a voice." It's called the Statue of Truth, and at its base, there's a small plaque dedicated to Elias Barrett and all those who dare to tell the truth. That evening, Lorraine turned on the TV. Amara sat on her lap, yawning. The news showed images of thousands of people gathered around the statue, lighting candles, singing "Lean on Me." Elias looked at the scene and said softly, "Perhaps America is beginning to learn to listen and learn to love yourself again." Lorraine replied confidently. Outside the window, the first snow of the season began to fall. The light from the fireplace reflected on the wall. warm and peaceful. Elias picked up the notebook and continued writing. When I started this journey, I thought I was fighting the world, but actually, I was just helping the world find itself. He put down his pen and smiled. Amara ran over and threw her arms around her father's neck. "Daddy, now everyone knows you're a good man." Elias leaned down and kissed his daughter lightly on the forehead. "No, my child. I'm just afraid of being wrong." The little girl raised her head, her eyes sparkling. "But I think you're a hero." Elias laughed, picking up his son. "In that case, you are my hero." Lorraine looked at them, the firelight reflecting off their faces. She knew that, despite the turmoil in the world outside, in this moment they had found peace. The night passed, the wind filtering through the cracks in the door. Elias sat watching the fire, his eyes reflecting the warm light. No more anger, no more resentment, only gratitude, for the truth had survived. Somewhere in his memory. "Mr. Brown's voice echoed. "You see, Elias, the truth may be buried, but it always finds its way back to the light." Elias closed his eyes, smiled, and whispered, "I see it. Brown, I see it. And out there, the snow still falls, covering the valley in white, like a blanket for the souls that have rested." Early morning. Snow still covered the small wooden house in the middle of the Colorado Valley. Thin sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the wooden table where Elias Barrett sat, an old leather notebook and a steaming cup of coffee in front of him. Outside, Amara Barrett's laughter echoed. She was chasing sparrows around the porch, her curly black hair shining in the morning sun. Lorraine Jenkins was hanging towels in the yard, smiling at them. Elias watched them for a long moment, his eyes full of love. He slowly opened the notebook and wrote on the first page of a new chapter, "To Amara, my beloved daughter." He paused, took a deep breath. Then the pen continued moving, each line flowing naturally, like a whisper. "By the time you read this, you will probably be older enough to understand that the world is not perfect. I wish I could tell you that justice is always done, that good people are always rewarded, but no, Amara. The truth is that the world is not fair, and that is why we must be kind." On the porch, Amara called out, "Daddy, I did it. I caught the falling snow." Elias laughed, stood up, and went to the door, watching his daughter raise her hand to catch the small snowflakes melting in the palm of her hand. "Very good, princess. But remember, the snow only stays if you hold it lightly. If you hold it too tightly, it will melt." The little girl nodded, serious as if learning a great lesson. "So it's like the truth, Dad. Should we be gentle?" Elias was stunned, then smiled. "Yes. The truth cannot be forced. It only stays with those who know how to cherish it." He returned to the table and continued writing. "You see, sometimes we can't change the world with words alone, but if you keep being kind, even in one small act, you make the world a little better. And that, Amara, is the only way you can defeat the darkness." A gentle breeze blew, carrying the scent of snow and pine. Lorraine entered, holding a cup of hot tea and placing it beside him. "Are you still writing?" Elias nodded, smiling slightly. "Yes. The last letter." She sat down opposite him, looking at him intently. "Do you think it will help her understand everything?" "No need to understand everything. Just remember, his father chose the right thing, no matter the cost." Lorraine was silent. After a moment, she said, "You did it, Elias. Not just for her, but for us." Elias looked up, his eyes softening. "Thank you for staying?" Lorraine laughed. "I told you, someone make sure you eat breakfast on time." They laughed together, small but warm laughter. That afternoon, the news spread across the National News Henderson Group was officially dissolved. Many officials were convicted, but more importantly, People began to talk more about the value of truth. Schools included Elias's story in their ethics curriculum. A reporter came to interview Elias. She asked, "Mr. Barrett, if you could go back, would you do anything differently?" Elias looked at her, his smile tired but sincere. "No, I just wish I had been brave sooner." The interview was broadcast nationally. When the screen went black, Lorraine sat next to him and whispered, "You know, the tone of your voice when you talk is believable. It's not loud, it's not angry, but it touches." Elias replied softly, "Perhaps because I used to be an unbeliever." Night fell. Amara was asleep. Lorraine had retired to her room. Elias sat at the table, finishing the last entries in his notebook. "Amara, if one day you feel tired, remember that even when everything seems to fall apart, you can always begin again like the sun after the snow. Don't be afraid to say what you believe is right, but don't forget to listen, because justice is not about winning. It's about understanding." He closed the notebook and put it in the drawer, along with the small photograph of himself, Lorraine, Amara, and the two deceased Marcus Lee and Mr. Brown. In the photo, they were all smiling. Elias looked for a long time, then said softly, "Thank you guys, for trusting me long enough to come along." Outside, the wind whistled through the cracks in the door, and the snow began to fall more heavily. He blew out the candle, leaving only the flickering firelight. The next morning, the sun was shining brightly. Amara woke up, ran down the stairs, and shouted, "Daddy, wake up! It stopped snowing. It's beautiful." Lorraine smiled, walked over, and put her hand on her shoulder. "Your father went out. He said he wanted to take a walk around the valley." The two stepped out onto the porch. Elias's footprints in the snow led to the distant hillside. There stood Elias, wrapped in a thick coat, holding a cup of coffee. He looked down into the valley, where the light reflected off the white snow, sparkling like a million crystals. Amara ran over and grabbed her father's hand. "Daddy, it's such a beautiful day." Elias nodded slightly. "Yes, you see, after all, the light still comes." The little girl leaned against him, was silent for a moment, then asked Dad, "When I grow up, can I do something like you?" Elias bent down and looked at his daughter, his eyes full of tenderness. "You don't have to be like your father, daughter. Just dare to do the right thing. Even if it's small, it can change the world." The little girl smiled and nodded vigorously. "I promise." The father and son stood still, watching the sun rise. Each ray of light filtered through the clouds and down into the snow-covered valley, painting a picture of a new beginning. Lorraine stood at a distance, watching them, smiling gently. She knew this story would never truly end. It would live on in every listener, every teller, because the truth, once spoken, never disappears. The imaginary camera gradually moves away the image of Elias holding Amara up, the golden light embracing the two father and daughter in the middle of a white snowy field. The narrator's voice echoes warmly. Sometimes the greatest thing a person can do is to keep their heart from turning to stone in the midst of injustice. And that, in turn, is how Elias Barrett changed the world. White light filled the screen. Background music played a slow, deep, and warm piano piece. The screen turned off, leaving a single sentence. The truth does not need to be shouted. It just needs to be lived. Elias Barrett. Story is not just a tragedy of a man wounded by prejudice. It is a mirror of society, where silence sometimes means acceptance of wrongdoing. Elias is not fighting for fame, but for something deeper, to let his daughter grow up in a world that knows how to say no to injustice. The story reminds us that justice is not always heroic. Sometimes it is patience, tolerance, small acts of ordinary people who dare to do the right thing even when no one sees. And it also reminds us that forgiveness is not weakness, but the most powerful way to close the pain and open up hope. Looking back on that journey, each of us, no matter what age, can see ourselves somewhere in Elias hurt, misunderstood, but still believing that people can be better than yesterday. If this story makes you think, feel, and believe a little more in human hearts, please take a few seconds to like, share with your loved ones, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to spread healing stories together, where truth and humanity still have room to live.